I have been asked here today to speak about my work, and the organizer said, please do so, talk about this transformative power of the EU integration process, but under the framework of the general topic for this event, blissful uncertainty. This I found very challenging and something to contend with, because in my personal and professional life, there is absolutely nothing blissful about uncertainty. Let me just say a few words as to why. I was born in 1982 in Kosovo, started school in 1988. For those of you, most of you here actually, who are familiar with this rite of passage for young students in socialist countries, you might actually remember how becoming a pioneer looks like. So I became a pioneer, I wore the little hat with the little star, the little red scarf, and I pledged allegiance at that time that I will honor, defend, and protect Yugoslavia. I did so in Albanian and in Serbian. I was the last generation pioneer. Yugoslavia started breaking up very violently soon after. And I had spent then the next 10 years going to school in a segregated school and a segregated school system. Serb kids were on one floor, Albanian kids on a different floor. And the school system, the Serbian language teaching was actually financed by the state, while the Albanian language teaching that became forbidden was organized voluntarily by the goodwill of our teachers. My friends started leaving in the 90s, escaping military draft to go and fight in wars all over Yugoslavia that they didn't want to fight. And eventually that war came to town, to my town, Pristina, and I had to flee as well. So here is a decade that I witnessed uncertainty leaving way to things going bad, going from bad to worse, actually continuously. And the reason why I tell you this story is not because my story is unique, is actually because my story is very common in all of the countries where I've been doing my work, from Georgia to Bosnia. I keep meeting people that have this very difficult relationship with uncertainty, because for them too, it left way to very violent transformations in their lives, in their environments. But this was not helpful for me to prepare this talk. So what I did is I actually sent an email around to a bunch of my friends in Europe, in the European Union, but also in other parts of Europe, to ask them, how do they experience uncertainty? What do they think? What do they feel? And I received very meaningful, beautiful answers by a lot of them. Some came very close to my experience of uncertainty. I have this friend from Kosovo who lives in Sweden who actually said it is outright offensive to call uncertainty blissful in any way. Uncertainty is the twin brother of despair, and there's nothing blissful there, ever, never. But the rest of the answers actually fell into two groups, which then helped me order my thoughts about where Europe is today, how it has developed in the last 20 years, and where it's heading in the next decade or two. I will call the first group, Uncertainty is a Fertile Place. Answers that belong to this group talked about uncertainty as this place that is continuously changing and moving and transforming and leaving way to actually positive things. I find this to be the story of Europe in the last decade. In 2004, 10 countries joined the European Union from the Southeast Europe. In 2007, 2 more joined them. So the European Union became this union, from a union of 15 countries, became this union of 27 countries. Amazing. No one would have thought that this was possible in the 1990s, but it became possible, and today really no one puts into question that the Czech Republic or Poland or Estonia is an EU member. And as we were trying to sort of raise our heads from the devastating wars of the 90s and trying to build some normalcy in the Western Balkans, we looked towards these countries and we said, look, Bulgaria joined, Hungary joined, this is possible. It was something that drove us as well, something that made us strive to get there. But this decade for the Western Balkans, it's largely one that is lost. I think we've failed to make it work for us. And let me just briefly talk a little bit about why I think this is. When it comes to the economy, the GDP per capita, average GDP per capita in all of the Western Balkan countries is about 30% of average GDP per capita in the EU. Employment, our economies just don't create enough jobs. In Kosovo, only 30% of those who are of working age and willing and able to work have a job. In Serbia, it's about 50%. The rest of the countries fall somewhere in between. We are the least educated Europeans. The OECD program for international student assessment that looks at the basic skills that 15-year-olds get in things like math, language, and science have ranked the different countries in Europe, and our countries are at the bottom of that list. The World Bank took the 2009 data and translated them into functional illiteracy. This is, you can read and write, but you don't really know how to use and to understand what you're reading and writing in any meaningful way. And the numbers are stark. In Serbia, 33% of 15-year-olds are functionally illiterate. In Albania, this number goes up to 55%. And when it comes to our relationship to the EU, we have not managed to make this big step forward yet. Our Western Balkan countries are now divided into two groups, roughly. You have those, the front runners, Serbia and Montenegro, that have already started accession talks and are already in this process where they hope that in the next decade they might actually join the EU. And then you have the laggards, Kosovo, Bosnia, Macedonia, and Albania, that have not even started this process. Kosovo is not recognized by 5 EU member states, cannot even apply. Bosnia has a very complex political system in place, very difficult to apply. Macedonia is blocked by Greece, and Albania has been held back by all the political problems that have happened in this country in the last 20 years. We have now reached a point where we're not sure who wants this enlargement anymore. The debate in most of the EU countries right now is, do we want these Western Balkan countries, these poor countries, to join us? We have enough problems. Look at the financial crisis, look at Greece, look at what's happening in Bulgaria and Romania. We're not sure if this is what we want anymore. But what's worrying me even more is the debate that is happening inside our countries, where we are saying, is it really worth it? Is it worth doing all the hard work if the most we can actually achieve is to join the EU in 10 years for Serbia and Montenegro that have started negotiating, and for the rest of the countries, who knows, 20 years, 25, 30. This skepticism about the most successful project in Europe that has made sure that peace and stability and prosperity were on good track, this skepticism worries me. And it goes beyond just whether these countries are catching up. It goes all the way to Ukraine and what's happening right now. I have a friend who's based in eastern Ukraine right now, and when I asked him what uncertainty is for him, he said 40,000 Russian troops poised just over the border of the town where I'm posted right now. This is a problem, this is real, and it's happening as we speak. The wars in the 1990s have all happened in countries that were not part of EU and were not part of NATO. I think this is very important to remember as we are going through this thinking process of what to do next, what to do today. The second group of answers that I got from my friends belong to this group that I will call uncertainty pushes our limits. Here they talked about how uncertainty is a motivator. It's something that makes us strive for better. It's a birthplace of creativity. They talked about how, in fact, as people, as we're trying to put some structures and some meaning into the uncertainty that life presents us with, we constantly become better as we're looking for answers. I think this applies to countries as well. The Western Balkans has right now reached a plateau. The numbers that I just quoted before have changed very little in the last decade, and I find this to be problematic, especially compared to the Baltics, that in the last 10 years, since they joined the EU, their GDP per capita has actually increased 30 to 40% in the different countries. If we then try to overcome this plateau that we have reached, I think it's worth looking at fields where people try to excel. In sports, in music, where people who are talented and work hard want to become the best in their field. And what they're teaching us is that, in fact, you cannot just keep doing the same thing over and over and pour mindless hours onto a problem and just hope to get different results by doing the very same thing. I think what they're teaching us is what's called now in popular literature deliberate practice, where you take the most difficult parts of something that doesn't work and you work at them very hard, focused, and you try to change them. How does this apply to our countries? I think still our best bet is the EU integration process. In order to become a candidate country, countries need to have made sure that their institutions guarantee democracy, human rights, rule of law, rights for minorities. But also, there's this other process, this is the deliberate practice process, where there's hundreds of thousands of pages of EU law, standards, regulations that have to be not only transposed into local law, but have to be implemented. That means that budgets have to be spent for them, people have to be put in place in order to implement those parts. And this is what fundamentally transforms countries. You know, everything about how we run our countries, from the way we produce our food, to the way we collect our trash, to the way we do tendering, we procure different tenders. But this process is right now having a bit of a crisis. Because as we are trying to discuss who should get this process and who shouldn't, the countries that negotiate go through this process, the countries that don't negotiate EU accession don't go through this process, we have forgotten why we started this project altogether. You know, why did we want to join the EU, and why did the EU want to enlarge and expand further? And again, Ukrainians have reminded us of this. As they were wrapped in EU flags and were protesting in -30 and were being shot at, they weren't thinking of the 200 pieces of EU legislation on the chapter of environment that need to be transposed at some point. They were thinking essentially about two fundamental things. When they wanted Ukraine to have a European future, they wanted European values, democracy, freedom, human rights, but they also wanted European prosperity. Out of 40 richest countries of the world today, 20 are in the EU. I don't think that this is a very bad moment. You know, I painted this grim picture. Ukraine might be breaking out in war. We've had a financial crisis, there's enlargement fatigue. But I find this moment to actually be pregnant with opportunity. The wars in the 90s led way to the enlargement in 2004. This moment today is making us all think about how do we want to move on to the next decade. I think the EU has to make sure that it sends a very clear signal about what it wants to do with the next enlargement. Start accession talks with all Western Balkan countries now. This is not a gift, this is a tool, this is a way to make sure that the technical aspect of joining the EU can actually be used for the good of transforming these countries. But I think a more important question that we in our countries here need to answer is, why do we want to join the EU, whether we still want to join the EU? If we cannot build systems, educational systems that educate our kids, if we cannot build economies that provide enough jobs, we are doing something wrong. And we need to change this as soon as is possible, today. We cannot wait for this anymore. To make this change, we need two things, two key ingredients. First, we need to believe that we are worthy of this change. The 2004 enlargement countries, they actually felt European. They wanted to be a part of Europe. They looked east and they said, this is not what we want to do anymore. We will make all that is necessary, all the changes necessary to join the EU. And I think, like in love and in life, we take what we believe we deserve. And we're not behaving like we feel that we deserve Europe. The second key ingredient is that we need to learn that it's absolutely up to us to do the changes that are necessary right now. One thread that connects most of the people I speak to in all of the countries that I work is that they have given up. They say, it's not up to me, you know, the corruption is too big in Albania, there's too many levels of government in Bosnia, too many international actors in Kosovo, this is not something we can work with. It's true, all of these are huge problems, but to a large extent, we've allowed these problems to happen to us. by voting the wrong people in place, by not demanding any accountability or responsibility from them, by not asking them to make our European dream true. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, that has seen her country go through this process very recently, said in an interview to us about a year ago that Croatia has fundamentally changed because of the EU accession process. But, she said, it's important to remember, no one can help you if you're not ready to help yourself. So let us be guided by this belief that we are European and we want to be a part of Europe. And let us be guided by this knowledge that it's actually up to us to ask our leaders to make the difficult choices that they need to make today in order to make this dream come true. Because we cannot afford to waste another decade. Thank you.